Detective Elena Marsh woke up to a sharp knock on her door. It was 4 a.m., and she'd only managed 2 hours of sleep. Her instincts told her it was bad news. "Detective Marsh, we have a situation," said Officer Green, standing in the doorway, his face pale under the streetlights. "You'll want to see this." 20 minutes later, Elena stood in the middle of a quiet park on the edge of the city. The victim, a man in his late 30s, was seated on a bench, his head tilted back unnaturally, eyes open and lifeless. A single red rose was placed in his lap, and a note pinned to his jacket read, "Find me before I find you." "This is the third one," said Green. "Same MO as the others." Elena's jaw tightened. The city had been haunted by a string of bizarre murders for weeks now. Each victim was left in a public place with a rose and a taunting note. The press had dubbed the killer the Night Gardener. "No witnesses?" Elena asked. "None. Whoever this is, they're a ghost." Back at the precinct, Elena pored over the files. The victims seemed unrelated, different backgrounds, professions, and neighborhoods. The only connection was the rose and the cryptic notes. "What if we're missing something?" Elena muttered to herself. Her partner, Detective Ryan Cross, walked in, carrying a tray of coffees. "You're thinking out loud again," he said, setting a cup in front of her. "What's the theory this time?" "There has to be a pattern," Elena said. "Something that ties them together, even if it's not obvious." Ryan nodded. "Well, the lab just sent over the tox screen on victim 2. Trace amounts of belladonna in the bloodstream." "Belladonna? That's unusual," Elena said, her mind racing. "A plant toxin, just like the roses. Maybe our killer has a thing for botany." Elena spent the next day cross-referencing the victims' histories. Hours of digging revealed one faint connection. All three had attended an exclusive event 2 years ago, a high society gala hosted by a reclusive horticulturist named Victor Hawthorne. "Hawthorne," Ryan said, leaning over her desk. "The guy's practically a legend. Built that enormous botanical garden downtown, but he's been off the radar for years." "Maybe not as off the radar as we thought," Elena replied. The detectives paid a visit to the botanical garden, now closed for renovations. The sprawling estate was eerily quiet, the air thick with the scent of flowers. They found Hawthorne in a greenhouse, tending to an exotic plant with dark bell-shaped blooms. "Detectives," he said without turning around. "I've been expecting you." Elena exchanged a glance with Ryan. "Mr. Hawthorne, we're investigating a series of murders. The victims all seem to have a connection to you." Hawthorne finally looked up, his piercing blue eyes unreadable. "Connection? That's an interesting choice of words." "Do you deny knowing them?" Ryan asked. Hawthorne smiled faintly. "I know many people, Detective, but if you're implying I'm involved in these tragedies, you're mistaken." Elena's gaze fell on the table behind him, where a single red rose lay beside a pair of gardening shears. "What can you tell us about belladonna?" she asked. Hawthorne's expression didn't falter. "A fascinating plant, beautiful, deadly, much like human nature. Wouldn't you agree?" As they left the estate, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Hawthorne knew more than he was letting on. "We need a warrant," she said. "For what?" Ryan asked. "He's slippery, but we don't have enough to tie him to the murders." That night, Elena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, "Hawthorne isn't your only suspect. Look deeper." Attached was a photo of a woman standing in a greenhouse, her face obscured. "Who the hell?" Elena muttered. The next morning, they traced the photo to a former employee of Hawthorne's, a botanist named Claire Novak. Claire had worked closely with him until she abruptly left 3 years ago. Neighbors reported seeing her packing her car in the middle of the night, never to return. Elena and Ryan tracked Claire to a small cabin outside the city. She was hesitant to talk, but eventually admitted she'd left after discovering Hawthorne's obsession with toxic plants and his strange experiments with belladonna. "He said it was for research," Claire said, her voice shaking. "But I think he was testing its effects on people. When I confronted him, he threatened me." Before they could ask more, a sound outside made them freeze. A single rose had been placed on the windshield of their car. "He's here," Elena whispered. They rushed outside, weapons drawn, but the woods were silent. Only the faint scent of roses lingered in the air. "Game's not over," Ryan said grimly. Elena nodded. Not by a long shot,